be screwed. Feel my own adrenaline, yeah, I do just what I do, and I hope you let me in, yeah.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 10th part of What If Aizen Finds BEN10 in Bleach Verse. Special note, this fanfic is written in the masterpiece of Bigby the Big Bad Wolf on fanfictionnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. What? What are you? Some kind of trouble magnet or something? Lilynette was currently screaming Ben's head off after the group returned. Hareble's group deciding to stick with them for the time being. Sterk had Lilynette stay behind when he went to go and investigate the rise in Berrigan's spiritual pressure. Obviously, she had plenty to say once she was told what had happened. Sometimes I wonder, Ben muttered, sticking a finger in his ear. Oh, Lilynette had kicked him in the leg. What was that for? For being so stupid, Lilynette barked at him. Sterk told you not to fight Berrigan and look what happened. I didn't fight him at first, Ben reminded her. Oh right, the whole, you'll spar with my Fraxian excuse, Lilynette scoffed. And you fell for that? No, Ben snapped. I had a feeling something was up, so I decided to see how things played out. Well, look at how well that turned out, Lilynette yelled. If Sterk hadn't been around to save your butt, if Swampfire didn't work. Lilynette, Sterk shouted at her, bringing his other half to a halt. Stark? She stared at him. Stark sighed as he sat down on his pillows. Look, what's done is done and everything worked out. Let's be grateful for that, okay? I agree, Harable said, herself resting against the wall. Still, Lilynette groaned as she rubbed her head before shooting Ben a smile. I'm glad you're okay, Ben. Ben laughed as he sat upon his bed. We should all be thanking Sterk, of course, Harable reminded him. I don't want to think of what Berrigan would have done if he hadn't arrived. Neither would I, to be honest, Sterk said under his breath. That was pretty intense though, Mueller Rose said to the Primera Espada. No offense to you, Sterk, but I never saw you look that angry before. Lilynette blinked. Sterk angry? Sterk cringed when he realized that everyone's attention was on him. I honestly thought he was going to tear Berrigan apart, Sung Sun said, regardless of Berrigan's powers. Lilynette gawked at her counterpart. Sterk's eyes darted from each of the other participants in the room before sighing and laying down on the pillows. Lilynette grumbled and seemed ready to attack him when Sterk said something that halted her assault. He hurt my friend. Lilynette nearly face-faulted at Sterk's words, staring at him with her mouth slightly open. Harable's eyes widened a fraction. Apache, Mueller rose, and Sung Sun stared at Sterk while Ben felt another smile creep onto his face. He wasn't the only one as Lilynette's gaping mouth closed into a smile that soon turned into a wide grin. She pounced upon Sterk and started tickling his sides. Hey, Sterk yelled as he thrashed around, trying to throw Lilynette off of him. You big softy, Lilynette teased him. Get off of me, Sterk told her. At least she's not hitting him, Ben whispered to the other girls, which earned him smiles and laughter. Just then there was a knock. Lilynette stopped her roughhousing and pushed herself off of Sterk, who got to his feet afterwards. Come in, he called. By now everyone suspected who it could be, and they were correct as Aizen walked into the room. He looked downcast and troubled, which worried the Arankar. Is everything all right, Lord Aizen? Harable asked. No, I'm afraid not, Harable, Aizen replied. Ben, how are you feeling? Oh, I'm feeling better, Ben waved his hands. See? Good, Aizen said, though his expression had not changed. I can no longer stand by and allow this sequence of events to continue. Therefore, I won't have you participate in the war. After the Soul Society is dealt with, I will combine its resources with mine and see if I can find a way to send you home. But aside from that, you won't partake in any of the fighting. What? Lilynette cried. Ben has already done enough for us thanks to the Oasis, Aizen said. But I can't keep asking him to fight for us after what happened now. In fact, I should have done this right after dealing with Grimjow. But I allowed my eagerness to have a new addition to our forces cloud my judgment. And for that, Ben, I'm sorry if I pressured you to continue helping us. Ben was floored by how saddened Aizen seemed, and it made him find it even harder to doubt him. Did Aizen really feel remorse over what had happened, or was he putting on an act to guilt-trip him? Fine by me, Stark said softly. What? Villian yelled, smacking him upside the head. Why would you say that? Think about it, Villian, Stark said. So far, Ben's entire time here has been fighting off one person after another. He's not required to help us, let alone risk his life for us. If this can keep him safe, then sure. Villian took a step back, moved by Stark's words. It's understandable, HAREM spoke up. If that is what you wish for, Ben, then we won't hold it against you. Everyone's eyes were on Ben. HAREM, Static, and Aizen looked calm while Villian, Apache, Miller Rose, and Sung Sun were conflicted. Ben knew it was dangerous, especially now, but staying in the fight would allow him to look like he was still trustful of Aizen and allow him more leeway in finding out about his true intentions. But there was another reason why Ben wanted to stick it out. HAREM and Stark. They and their Fraxian were good people. If the Soul Society was as bad as he was told, Ben didn't want them to die. And if Aizen was the bad guy all along, he didn't want them to fall prey to his machinations. He'd had enough experience with bad guys who treated their minions as disposable tools. Don't worry, he told them. I'll still fight. Aizen closed his eyes and nodded while everyone else stared. Had they really expected him to back out? You're still going to help us? Miller Rose asked. Even after. Ben, HAREM said, you're not obligated to help us. Especially not after everything you've been through since you arrived. I know, and I'm not doing this out of obligation, Ben said, grinning. Besides, what kind of hero would I be if I turned my back now? A suicidal one, Sung Sun commented. Ben just shrugged. Danger comes with the job. HAREM stared at Ben, her respect for him becoming even greater. Stark himself had a tiny smile on his face which contrasted with the massive grin on Villian's. Apache, Miller Rose, and Sung Sun all looked relieved. Thank you, Ben, Aizen said, for all you have done and more. I promise I will take more measures to ensure your safety within Lost Notches from now on. And I'll do more to keep an eye on him, Lord Aizen, Stark promised. I'm sorry I haven't been doing a good job so far. Aizen scratched his chin, interested in Stark's sudden dedication to his task. Very well, Static. And I will too, HAREM told him. Aizen smiled at this. Thank you both. We'll help too, Villian declared. Sure thing, Apache spoke up. Why wouldn't we? Miller Rose added. Sung Sun silently nodded with them. I'm glad to see that at least some of us are getting along with Ben. And so, he turned towards Apache, Miller Rose, and Sung Sun. I heard you three defeated the majority of Berrigan's own Fraxian. And judging from your state compared to theirs, it was completely one-sided in your favor. All three smiled at Aizen's praise. There's a little more to it than that, Miller Rose admitted. Regardless, Aizen said, it shows that your training has been going wonderfully. I'm proud of you three. Apache and Miller Rose's smiles grew. Sung Sun's mouth was once again covered, though one could see the corners of her mouth peeking out from the edge of her sleeve. Aizen's smile soon faded to a more troubled look. I wasn't expecting the day to turn out this way, but I suppose it cannot be helped. As you have learned by now, Ben, many of the Urankar are as ruthless as they are powerful. But at least they are honest about it instead of covering it up with an air of self-righteousness. That doesn't excuse their behavior, but alas, it makes them necessary for the war. Ah, was all Ben could think to say. I apologize, I was musing, Aizen said. What I mean is, since you still intend to fight, I feel I must prepare you for the ruthlessness of the Gaudy 13. Consider the letter I gave you a starting point to what I will tell you now. Ben leaned forward, curious to what Aizen had to say. By far, two of the most dangerous are Kenpachi and Kiritsuchi. Kenpachi is more beast than man, striving for the thrill of the fight. He gets riled up at the thought of fighting powerful opponents and will stop at nothing to do so. He even gets excited if his opponent is capable of hurting him, because it shows the promise of a good match. Though, perhaps the greatest ruthlessness of all is not with Kenpachi himself, but with the Squad 11's requirement to become captain. And what would that be? Ben dared to ask. Kill the current captain in single combat, with an audience of over 200 members as witnesses. Zaraki did this with a single blow. Ben blanched upon hearing this. Okay, seriously, why would they allow a rule like that? Were all the other captains okay with this? Squad 11 lives and dies for combat, Aizen said. And while they might have had qualms with Kenpachi himself, they knew it was the rule of Squad 11 and simply went along with it. Ben frowned upon hearing this. I'm afraid to ask, but what about that Kiritsuchi guy? I know your notes mentioned he was a scientist. That's correct. He is in charge of Squad 12, specifically the Technological Development Department. Kiritsuchi is a man of science to the highest degree. Research and experimentation are his passion, but he disregards impediments such as morals and ethics. To him, all living beings are guinea pigs for him to poke and prod as he sees fit. He even experimented on the members of his own division without their consent, turning them into living bombs. Ben's frown quickly changed into a scowl when he heard this, and his hands starting forming into fists. But the greatest form of his SDSM is his Lieutenant Nemu Kiritsuchi. When Ben opened his mouth to ask, Aizen cut him off. Nemu is his daughter in the sense that Kiritsuchi is her creator. Nemu is an artificial soul implanted in an artificial body known as a gige. You can actually make a soul? It's not as easy as you might think, Aizen told him. I will say this about Kiritsuchi. He is unscrupulous, but he is brilliant. Sadly, even though Nemu is regarded as his finest creation, he doesn't treat her any better than any of his other subjects. He demeans and abuses her, believing that as her creator, he can treat her as he sees fit. Ben looked down at the floor in disgust. But the most ruthless of them all, if you haven't realized it already, is none other than the Captain Commander himself, Aizen said. There are many reasons why he has retained his position for the past 1,000 years, and one of them is because he will go to any lengths to enforce the Soul Society's rule. I told you about how he allowed a Soul Reaper to be executed for granting a human her powers despite her reason being that she could save his family. But that is far from the worst he's done. I'm afraid to know what, Ben muttered dryly. Perhaps the most ruthless thing he's done, that I'm aware of at least, would be the fate of the Quincy, Aizen mused. Quincy, Ben repeated. The Quincy were a group of humans born with spiritual powers. They made it their own mission to hunt hollows in the living world. However, unlike Soul Reapers, Quincy did not purify hollows, they destroyed them. The Arenkar all shifted uneasily while Ben felt apprehension running up his spine. By destroyed you mean? When a hollow dies by a Quincy's hands, they cease to exist, Aizen clarified. Ben's jaw dropped at this information. Cease to exist? Yes. But why would they do that? Ben asked. The Quincy tried to pass it off as saying that, since hollows fed upon souls, they no longer had the right to live, Aizen explained. All the girls glared while Stark simply closed his eyes, lowering his head. Ben was prepared to argue, but Aizen once again cut him off. However, I always believed there was another reason for why they chose to exterminate hollows. Tragically, the Soul Society could have chosen to collaborate with the Quincy, find out the real reason they hunted hollows and help them. But instead, they simply ordered the Quincy to cease their activities. They didn't even bother to explain that by killing hollows instead of purifying them upset the balance of nature and risked destroying the world. The Quincy were unaware of this and refused. The commander then ordered their extermination, which became known as the Quincy Massacre. Ben froze to the spot. Just like that, he didn't even try to find other options first? No, Aizen said. There are at least some Quincy still around, though I don't know the exact number. Ben sat down as he heard all of this. The commander didn't even bother explaining why it was bad for them to kill hollows like they did. Aizen shook his head. The Captain Commander sees his orders as absolute, even more so those of the Soul Society's ruling body, the Central 46. If he tells you to do something, you do it without question or hesitation. Ben eyed the floor bitterly. I'm not saying what the Quincy were doing is right, but those guys really didn't bother explaining the situation. They didn't even look for alternate solutions first. Yamamoto will go to great lengths for the sake of balance and peace, but only through what he says is right. Ben let out a deep breath as he rubbed his head. Wow. Now that I have told you what the Gaudy 13 are willing to do for their goals, will you still stand with us? Aizen asked. Ben took another deep breath to steady himself. Yeah, I still am. Thanks for giving me the heads up though. You are most welcome, Ben, Aizen said warmly. You've been through quite a lot of excitement lately, so I'll let you relax. Congratulations on your victory against Baragon and his subordinates. And once again you have my thanks for helping us create the oasis. Ben grinned, though it was a smaller one than usual, something the others noticed. No problem. Aizen smiled before heading towards the door. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to have a talk with Baragon. With that, he left. The moment Aizen left, everyone turned to look at Ben. Are you okay? Lillianette asked him. Yeah, Ben said as he leaned back. Yeah, I'm all right. Just a little worn out. A lot has happened today, Harable said. Would you like to rest? Ben looked over at his bed. Yeah, I think I need to lie down a little. We'll let you rest, Harable said. Ladies. Right, all three said at the same time. Take care, Ben, Apache called back. Get some rest, Mila Rose told him. We'll need to resume sparring to keep our skills up, Sung Sun added. Oh great, Ben mumbled as he took off his shoes and climbed into bed. Sleep well, Harable said to him. Thank you, Ben said as he rested his head against the pillow. And once again, Harable said as he approached the door, stopping to look over her shoulder at him. Thank you for everything. Ben laughed. No problem, Harable. Harable and her girls left the room. Steak decided to resume his own nap, and Lillianette, puffing her cheeks when she realized she had nothing to do, decided to amuse herself by rereading Aizen's notes. Although tired from the day's events, Ben wasn't in any rush to fall asleep. His mind boggled with the things Aizen had told him about the captains. He'd like to say he couldn't believe anyone would do such things, but his past experiences had taught him otherwise. What would the Soul Society be willing to do in order to stop Aizen? What would they do once they found out about him? Ben tensed, having a feeling that he was going to be handed over to Kiritsuchi for obvious reasons. But what if that was all stuff Aizen made up? Ben groaned at his lack of progress. Was Aizen the bad guy, or were the 13 court guard squads? Were both bad? If so, who was the lesser evil? Ben hoped a real opportunity to find the truth would come along, and soon. As Aizen walked down the hallway, he paused. You can come out now, Shale. The 8th Espada approached Aizen gleefully. Forgive me, Lord Aizen, I couldn't quite contain myself. Aizen chuckled as he reached into his pocket. Shale was on the verge of salivating as Aizen deposited Swampfire's previous, shriveled arms and a few of Diamond Head's shards into the Espada's open hands. Wonderful, Shale said gleefully, holding the contents in his hands like he had been granted a precious treasure. Quite fitting he was given literal diamonds. I know you were planning on a subtle way of obtaining samples, but I figured I might as well give some in advance, Aizen told him. Oh thank you, Lord Aizen. These will do wonderfully. I believe you will find the shards to be more worthy of study at the moment, Aizen said. The vagueness of his statement caused Shale to look at him curiously. Those shards, as well as Diamond Head himself, have shown the inability to age, as proven during Ben's confrontation with Baragon. Shale stared at Aizen before the full meaning of his statement sank in. Shale's eyes threatened to pop out of his head, and his mouth struggled to form coherent words. You don't mean Ben actually. He did not defeat Baragon, though Diamond Head was capable of at least holding his own. Shale's hands shook as he looked down at the shards with a greater awe. Thank you, Lord Aizen, for providing me with these samples. These will prove very beneficial to my research. I'm glad to hear it, Aizen said, if you'll excuse me. Where are you going, Lord Aizen? Shale asked. Ben was not Baragon's initial target, but that didn't stop him from going after our guest either, Aizen said. He is the latest of my Arankar who wish to attack Ben despite my constant warning that he be left alone. If they will not listen to me, then I will give them a reason to do so. And if I must make an example to my point clear, then so be it. Shale shook his head as he watched Aizen turn around the corner. Oh dear, Baragon, he said as he looked once more at the contents in his hands. Looks like your pride got you into trouble again. As for these, he chuckled, They will be perfect additions to my growing collection. After the battle with Barragan, it was very clear to all the Arankar within Lost Notches to steer clear of Ben. Of course, that didn't stop Harable and Stack from taking extra precautions. Not only did Harable and Stack make sure that Ben was always accompanied by at least one of them outside of their rooms, Ben had taken to staying in his alien forms too. Diamond Head, Chromastone, and RG, Water Hazard. Ben picked his most durable aliens to make sure nobody could get the drop on him. Fortunately, some of these drastic measures may not have been necessary. Ben was no longer harassed by the likes of Enoitra, Grimjow, Luppy, or any other Arankar that had some issue with him. Whatever Aizen had done seemed to work, much to Ben's relief. Stark and Harable did not wish to take a chance and Ben agreed with them. As for the oasis, Aizen had whatever fruit seemed ripe enough to be harvested put into storage to be used at a later time. Shale had taken some so he could harvest the seeds in order to plant more. He also admitted that he wanted to study some of the plants and see if modifications could be made to improve them and in turn, improve the fruits. Perhaps we should expand upon the oasis we already have first, he had told Ben earlier when the hero asked if he would have time to work on those conductors for another oasis. One cannot deny the benefits of these plants, but at the same time we have to make sure they don't grow out of control. Heh. The last thing we need is for Lost Notches to have a weed problem on our hands. Ben and Tozen sparred when possible, and then Ben in turn would spar with Harable's Phyrexione. Their coordination was excellent, and they seemed to be more trusting towards each other in the heat of battle, something that had not gone unnoticed by their leader. No, from a distance as Harable watched something amazing happen. Her Phyrexione almost butted heads but had each other's backs, in their own way at least. Now any insult was obviously a jest and taken in stride, the girls now more willing to listen to each other's advice, congratulate and encourage each other, all because of this one human. The changes didn't just happen in battle either. Her Phyrexione hadn't noticed but Harable sure had. Before BEN10 came along, when had any of her Phyrexione smiled, not just triumphantly smirked, but actually smiled. The way their faces lit up whenever they played around with Ben after a strong training session. The bubbling laughter whenever he did something funny, the excitement when he told them how he had defeated his latest opponent, even after they had become a Arankar and entered the relative safety of Lost Notches. Harable and her Phyrexione were still focused on survival. But now, with BEN10, they were having fun and enjoying themselves. What's more, the girls were completely unaware of this great change and Harable didn't feel the need to point it out. But how long would this peace last? Whenever Ben mentioned going back to his own dimension, she saw the subtle shift in their faces. But to none of them, not even Sung Sun, could hide the hesitant, wistful looks on their faces. You don't want him to go home. All three had flinched at Harable's words. Ben had long since returned to Stack's chambers, allowing her this private moment with her Phyrexione. Sung Sun had averted her gaze while Mila Rose hung her head. Apache had stammered for a moment, much to her own frustration. After taking a deep breath, she started over. It's not that we don't want him to go home, Lady Harable, Apache had replied. It's just that when he does, she looked at her feet, we'll never see him again. Mila Rose then sighed before she too faced their leader. We understand that he needs to return to his own dimension, that he has his own responsibilities and people that are waiting for him. It's we. He makes you happy. The girls flinched again at Harable's words. There's nothing to be ashamed of, girls. You've been enjoying yourselves during his stay, and I'm happy to see you three able to have fun. That made the girls relax, as they smiled sheepishly. But you must understand, girls, Harable had said firmly. Ben needs to go back. He has his own life to live and problems in his own dimension he needs to fix, just as we have our duty to Lord Aizen. The girls nodded in understanding, but couldn't help the looks of melancholy on their faces. Harable walked out to the balcony, staring at the oasis in the distance. Do not be sad when he leaves, girls, Harable said. For now, enjoy as much time as you can with him. When he leaves, think of all the good times you had with him. Cherish those memories. We understand, Lady Harable, Apache said softly, Mila Rose and Sung Sun nodding in agreement. Harable didn't need to turn around to know they had done so. Good, Harable said to them gently, still looking out at the oasis. Though, I do not believe BEN10's legacy here will be forgotten any time soon. Shale had been strong at work, not just with the plants he had harvested, but also with the other samples Aizen had provided for him. Speaking of whom, Aizen himself had entered Shale's lab. "How is everything, Shale?" Shale, who had been typing furiously at his computer, turned towards Aizen with a smirk. "So far everything is working perfectly, Lord Aizen. I believe I might even complete the first subjects ahead of schedule." "I'm glad to hear it," Aizen had said, looking over Shale's shoulder to see the data on the screen. "And your plans to expand the oasis?" Shale had chuckled, his eyes lowering. "If my calculations are correct, I'll turn that little oasis into a jungle. We'll need to be prepared for when the hollows outside Los Notches sense that abundance of spiritual energy," Aizen had mused, cupping his chin though his smile never left his face. "Most know better than to come here, but there will be those foolish and reckless enough to try. You think Runaganga won't be enough to stop them?" "Runaganga is diligent," Aizen had replied. "But I'd prefer to take extra precautions, especially since I've decided to test the capabilities of some of the fruits in storage." Shale's eyes widened before immediately lowering again. "Oh Tilda, Lord Aizen. When you get the results from your test, do let me know. I'm eager to see them for myself." Aizen had closed his eyes, slowly opening them again. "I'll be sure you get them, Shale." As for Ben, he had been in Stark's chambers with Stark himself and Lilinet when those two Arrancar girls, Loli and Menali, arrived to say that their presence had been requested by Lord Aizen. Soon they were led to the throne room, where several of the Espada had gathered, all resting on pillars. Luppy glared daggers at Ben from his pillar, but averted his eyes when Stark looked at him. Hannibal gave them both a reassuring nod. In the middle of the room stood Aizen. Before him was a transparent cube with what appeared to be a heavily bandaged human shape inside. A smaller cube sat on top of the larger one. In the middle of the top cube hovered a small, black sphere. Ben tried to make sense of what he was seeing when Aizen turned his head and smiled. "Hello, Ben," he said pleasantly. "I don't believe I've ever shown you this before. This is what has allowed me to make so much progress in Hukomundo. It is the Hajoku." Ben blinked at the aforementioned sphere. "The Hajoku, eh?" For some reason Ben couldn't help feeling apprehensive as he continued looking at it. "The Hajoku was created by one of my fellow soul reapers, Kisukirahara," Aizen explained. "It is what allows me to turn hollows into Arrancars. Although hollows are capable of becoming Arrancar naturally, there is far too much risk. The Hajoku allows them to become Arrancar without complications and therefore be at the height of their power." "Huh," was all Ben could think of, looking at the bandaged figure inside the larger cube. "But Urahara, fearing the Hajoku's power, sealed it," Aizen went on. "Essentially, it is sleeping." Ben opened his mouth, but his question was cut short when the doors opened. Ulquiorra and Yami promptly entered the room. "Welcome, Ulquiorra, Yami," Aizen said. "I was explaining the Hajoku to Ben here. I just told him how it was sealed and needed time to awaken." "What is the status of the Hajoku's awakening, Lord Aizen?" Ulquiorra inquired. 50%, Aizen immediately answered. "Under normal circumstances at least, which is all Soul Society will take into consideration." If the Hajoku has been sealed," Ben spoke up, "then how have you been able to use it to turn hollows into Arrancars?" Aizen's smile grew a fraction and Ben felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up at the gleam in the Soul Reaper's eye. "Because I discovered something that no one, not even Kisukirahara himself, would be aware of," Aizen answered. He reached through an opening in the cube towards the Hajoku. "And what I discovered is that when someone with spiritual pressure higher than a captain temporarily unites with the Hajoku, for a brief moment, it displays power equal to that of its unsealed state." For a brief moment, it looked as the Hajoku had sprouted small tendrils that reached out to touch Aizen's fingertips. Then the entire room felt heavy. What seemed like seconds felt like minutes to Ben as his breath was cut short and he felt dizzy. Stark put a hand on his shoulder and everything cleared. Was that sensation the power of the Hajoku? "You've never felt Lord Aizen's spiritual pressure before, have you?" Stark whispered to Ben. "It flaring up thanks to that Hajoku takes some getting used to. Sorry I forgot to warn ya." Anything Ben could have said to Stark was interrupted by the sound of glass shattering. The larger cube had been destroyed. Kneeling on the ground was a skinny, male Arankar with blonde hair and mask remains that resembled a crown on his head. Aizen looked down at the new Arankar. "Would you tell us your name, new comrade?" Slowly the new Arankar looked up at Aizen, a dazed look in his purple eyes. "Wonderwace," he murmured. "Wonderwace Margella." Aizen smiled at his latest warrior as Ben processed what he had just seen. The Hajoku, and Aizen had been capable of forming an army with it despite its sealed state. Once that thing was fully awoken. It reminded Ben a little too much of Vilgax for his liking. "Do you remember what I spoke to you about last month, Ulquiorra?" Aizen asked suddenly. "I do, sir," Ulquiorra replied, stoic as ever. "Put it into motion," Aizen told him. Ben raised a brow. Aizen noticed this and tilted his head, his smile never leaving. "While I'll leave the exact details to you, Ulquiorra," he said, "I want you to take Ben with you." Stock and Hannibal both stood up straighter at Aizen's orders while sharing a look of confusion and concern. "I understand, sir," Ulquiorra said. His expression hadn't changed in the slightest despite these new orders. "Okay, would somebody mind telling me what's going on?" Ben cut in, apprehension gnawing at his gut. "I am sending Ulquiorra to retrieve something from the living world that will be vital to our plans," Aizen said. "But there is no way for him to enter the living world without being detected by the Soul Reapers. As such, I am allowing him to bring additional forces to engage the Soul Reapers and keep them distracted from our true goal. As for why I wish for you to join Ben, I believe it's time to test your abilities against an actual Soul Reaper enemy. Not to mention, this is the perfect chance to identify the masked person aiding them." Hannibal and Stark stared at Aizen, which did not go unnoticed by Enoitra. "This is what he's been training for, isn't it?" Enoitra said with a sneer. "Are you actually scared one of the Soul Reapers might kill him?" "I highly doubt the Soul Reapers could be a threat to Ben," Ulquiorra admitted, surprising some of the Arankar. "Stark, Hannibal, you have my word that I will make sure he returns to Hugo. "Of course," Aizen said. "I do wish for this to be Ben's decision in the end. So, Ben, will you accompany Ulquiorra?" Ben thought it over and honestly, this seemed like the perfect opportunity. It was strong for Ben to believe that he had been in Hugo for over a month and still nowhere closer to getting home or finding out Aizen's true intentions. He had little knowledge of the layout of Las Notches or the extent of any surveillance system. Ben was worried the moment he tried to sneak around and get some clues that he would be immediately caught. The young hero tried to remember the last time he had felt so trapped. Of course, if Aizen was a liar, where did that leave Stack, Hannibal, and those under them? Had all the times Ben had spent with them meant anything? Or was it all a ploy? Despite Ben wanting to be suspicious, he found it strong to whenever he actually spent time with them. That realization led to another thought. If Aizen was lying, could it be possible he was lying to his own subordinates as well? Unfortunately, Ben was stuck with the same solution he had been using since day one. Play it by ear and be prepared for trouble. What was that mysterious guy's plan in sending Ben to this universe? And what about that masked man helping the Soul Reapers? How did he fit into all of this? Though he managed to keep a cool head around the Arankar, there were times Ben wanted to tear his hair out. Was it too much to ask for a little hint in the right direction? This mission may in fact be that window of opportunity he needed. "Sure," Ben crossed his arms as he gave Aizen his cockiest grin. "Let's see how these Soul Reapers stack up against the hero of an entire universe." Aizen chuckled. "They will have no idea what's in store for them." "Very well, Ulquiorra. Take whoever else you wish. Oh, that reminds me." He looked over his shoulder and raised his head. "Do you wish to go Grimmjow?" Ben followed Aizen's line of sight to see Grimmjow sitting on one of the more elevated pillars. He was now sporting a burn scar running diagonally down his chest and, like Luppy had said, was missing his left arm. Ben cringed at the thought of having to be anywhere near the sixth Espada, worried that he might try to take out his bad mood on Ben himself. "What? You're going to the living world?" Ben and Sterk had wasted no time in returning to their chambers and telling Lillinet what had happened. Now she was pacing back and forth. "Lord Aizen wants you to fight the Soul Reapers now?" She waved her arms erratically. But what if they hurt you? Capture you? What if?" "Don't worry, Lillinet," Ben said softly. Aizen said we're just keeping them busy until Ulquiorra gets whatever he's looking for. Then we'll head right back to Hugo Mundo safe and sound. Grimmjow got his whole team killed the last time they went to the living world, Lillinet screeched in frustration. Ben ran a hand through his hair. Yeah, good point. Grimmjow went to Karakura town without permission and without a plan, Stack said from his pile of cushions. Ulquiorra's not only more powerful but also more tactical. He promised nothing bad would happen to Ben, and I find him more dependable compared to some of the others around here. Why do you think Lord Aizen relies on him so much? Lillinet grit her teeth and looked ready to slug Stack, but Ben grabbed her hand and gently pushed it down. I appreciate you looking out for me, Lillinet, he said, giving her a one-armed hug. But I will be careful, I promise. There was a knock at the door. Stack stared at it as he activated his Pesquisa. After a moment he relaxed. Come on in, Harable. The door opened to reveal Harable and her Fraxione. We came to wish you luck, though I wish we could do more, Sung Sun said, cutting straight to the point. We understand why Lord Aizen is sending you to the living world, but we feel that we should be there too, to provide you with proper backup. Lord Aizen left it up to Ulquiorra to decide who accompanies him, though, Harable reminded her. How come we don't ask him to let us come along? Apache asked. Too many forces may cause Soul Society to deploy stronger forces, if they haven't already thanks to Grimmjow's blunder. Everyone turned to see Ulquiorra approaching Sterk's chambers. That and I would be held responsible if anything to you three. Just as Grimmjow was punished for the death of his own Fraxione, Ulquiorra continued. Since you are not my Fraxione, Lord Aizen would be even more displeased if I allowed anything to happen to you. Come on, Ulquiorra, Apache urged. We've gotten a lot stronger now, probably stronger than Grimmjow's Fraxione were. We can handle this. If Ben was not accompanying us, perhaps. Miller Rose narrowed her eyes. What does that mean? You three are obviously fond of him, Ulquiorra said bluntly. That could be a hindrance in battle. A hindrance? Apache stomped up to him. After everything we've been through here, Luppy, Enoitra, Barragan, you call those hindrances? You were still within Lost Notches and therefore had easier access to aid, Ulquiorra said, no more shaken by Apache's outburst than anything else. In the living world, Lord Aizen won't be there to assist if things escalate. Besides, suppose if the opposite situation happens, where Ben is more concerned with your well-being than his own preservation. Do you want to shoulder that burden? Apache's whole body shook, her fists trembled, and her teeth were grinding against each other. It took all her willpower not to lash out at the fourth Espada. She flinched when she felt a hand on her shoulder, turning her head sharply to see it was none other than Harable herself. Harable then turned to face Ulquiorra. We will respect your decision, Ulquiorra, she said. You're here to retrieve Ben for the mission? I am, Ulquiorra looked directly at Ben. Are you ready? Ben takes a deep breath. Ready as I'll ever be. Lead the way, Ulquiorra. Ulquiorra turned on his heel and proceeded down the hall. Ben made way to follow him when someone suddenly tackled him with a hug. Come back safe, okay? She murmured in his jacket. It was moments like these that made it strong for Ben to think he was being tricked. Closing his eyes, he returned the hug. I will, Lillinet. Good luck, Ben, Harable said. Show those Soul Reapers who's boss, Apache cheered. Miller Rose smirked. Not like they stand a chance against you anyway. If they thought highly of themselves after dealing with Grimmjow, Sung Sun said, they'll be in for a rude awakening. Be safe, was all Stark said. Thanks, everyone, Ben waved them goodbye before running after Ulquiorra. So, Ulquiorra, Ben said as they walked down the hallway. What exactly do you need to retrieve from the living world? We're not immediately retrieving it, Ulquiorra said. Rather, I am securing it to retrieve at a later date. To do so now would draw the attention of the Soul Reapers. But what exactly is it? Ben asked. Something that should be a valuable asset to Lord Aizen's plan, Ulquiorra replied. That's all you need to know. Ben frowned at the cryptic response. Was he worried that Ben might accidentally let it slip to the Soul Reapers when they met each other? Or was it something Ben himself wouldn't agree with? Before we leave, I suggest you turn into one of your aliens, Ulquiorra said suddenly. Although it's obvious, I should stress that you cannot allow the Soul Reapers to prevent you from using your Ultimatrix. Ben raised a brow at Ulquiorra, changing the subject. Good point. He activated the Ultimatrix and slammed the dial down. A flash of green light later and Ben had turned into Diamond Head. A good choice, Ulquiorra stated before he resumed walking. Diamond Head just stared at him. Does that guy ever show emotion? He muttered under his breath before chasing after the fourth espada. Soon they were back in the throne room where Yami, Grimmjow, Luppy, and that new guy Wonderwace had gathered around. Just you guys? Diamond Head asked in surprise. 2 espada, 1 former member, and a new recruit should be sufficient enough, Ulquiorra said. The 5 of you will go on ahead to Karakura town. I shall join you via a separate route. Won't the Soul Reapers sense you appearing somewhere else? Diamond Head asked. Not if you keep their focus on yourselves, Ulquiorra answered. Your presence in particular should be more than enough to draw their attention. Yami grinned. I'm kinda looking forward to seeing Ben here in action against the Soul Reapers. He's been kicking plenty of Arrancar butt. He couldn't resist smirking at Luppy and Grimmjow, who scoffed and looked away in annoyance. Wonderwace just seemed to be staring into space, his mouth hanging slightly open. Diamond Head frowned. Was it a good idea to bring this guy along? You all have the fruits that Lord Aizen provided you? Ulquiorra asked, startling Diamond Head. Wait, what? Grimmjow, Luppy, and Yami all pulled a fruit from their pockets. Aizen's actually allowing you to take some of the fruits. He believed this was a perfect opportunity to test their capabilities in the heat of battle as a support item, Ulquiorra explained. Use them whenever you see fit, but it would be in your best interest to use them when absolutely necessary. He tilted his head at Grimmjow. Do not underestimate your opponents. Grimmjow let out a low snarl, though Ulquiorra was predictably unfazed. Yeah, Ulquiorra, Yami said as he pocketed his fruit. Those Soul Reapers won't know what hit them. Very well, Ulquiorra said. Prepare to depart. Suddenly there was a shift in the air. To Diamond Head, it seemed as if the air in front of him was splitting in 2 horizontally, creating a gaping hole into blackness. That is a garganta, Ulquiorra said to the staring hero. It is what hollows and Arrancar use to travel between Hucomundo and the living world. Those using it create a foothold with their spiritual energy. Yami stepped into the garganta. The moment he did, a bridge of light seemed to form under his feet and expand into the darkness. The other 3 Arrancar joined him. Hey, Yami called to Diamond Head. You coming? Right, Diamond Head stepped into the garganta, surprised by how solid the pathway was, though he reasoned it was probably because the others had strengthened it. He turned to wave Ulquiorra goodbye. Wish us luck, Ulquiorra. Ulquiorra said nothing as the garganta started to close. Tough crowd, Diamond Head said dryly. Yami snickered. That's Ulquiorra for you. Come on, we got a job to do. The others said nothing as they proceeded down the path that would take them to Karakura town. Diamond Head sighed. He didn't know what he was expecting, but there was no turning back now. He followed after them. The wielder of the Ultimatrix hoped he didn't look fidgety as they proceeded through the garganta. Since no one was in the mood for conversation, not that he wanted to chat with any of his present company, Ben in the form of Diamond Head took a moment to take in his surroundings. The swirling darkness around them was not improving his mood, not in the least because of the thought that one of his companions might be tempted to push him into it. There wasn't any point worrying about it though, so Ben decided to think. Once they reached the other side of this garganta, they would arrive in the human world and he would meet his first Soul Reapers outside of Aizen's group. He had to find out the Soul Reapers' side of the story without the Arrancar noticing. From there he would have to try and figure out the full picture. For all he knew, the Soul Reapers were just as bad as Aizen said they were. Would the Soul Reapers be willing to hear him out, or just attack him for being with the Arrancar? Could he talk to one of them unnoticed? Grimmjow was his main concern due to him being the most perceptive. Hopefully he'd be distracted by other potential enemies. Luppy was full of himself and probably cared more about flaunting his power to someone he might stand a chance against. Ben didn't really know Yami and Wonderwace that well, but being the 10th Espada hopefully meant that the former wasn't much trouble. Just then the darkness in front of them began to split open, revealing a bright blue sky with white clouds. They had reached their destination. Cautiously Ben stuck his head out of the garganta. They seemed to be in a clearing with green grass and some trees, possibly a park of some kind. He was relieved, at least they were away from any. Then Ben spotted 4 individuals looking up at them. One of them was a man with shoulder-length black hair with some feathers attached to his right eyebrow and eyelash. Another was a tall man with a bald head. The third person was a woman with strawberry blonde hair. The last one was a young boy with spiky, sheer white hair. Yami chuckled as he looked down at them. "Looks like we came out in a pretty good spot, didn't we?" "Yeah," Ben mumbled, certain that they had just run into the Soul Reapers stationed here. At least they were away from any populated areas. "Those guys have some pretty high spiritual pressure," Yami said gleefully. "They've got to be the Soul Reapers, right? Swearte." Luppy leaned forward to get a better look. "Ah, so these are the reinforcements from Soul Society that Mr. Six was talking about." He looked over his shoulder and shot Grimjow a mock apologetic glance. "Oh, sorry, it's former Mr. Six, isn't it?" Grimjow glared at Luppy out of the corner of his eye. At first Ben expected him to attack only for the former Espada to mutter under his breath, "The one I want to kill isn't here." Ben cringed, but before anyone could respond, Grimjow shot out of the garganta and flew off. Well, at least that kept him out of Ben's way, but hopefully whoever he was after could handle themselves. "But," Yami growled. "Ah, ignore him," Luppy said with a dismissive shrug. "He's not an Espada anymore. He can't do much anyway." Still grumbling, Yami surveyed the people before them, frowning. "Looks like the one I want to kill isn't here either." "Oh," Luppy asked with a playful look. "The one you want to kill wouldn't happen to be the one who cut your arm off? Or the one that beat you up while withstanding your Ciro?" "Both," Yami replied with a smirk before turning towards Ben. "All right, your first real battle with a Soul Reaper. You ready for it?" Ben raised his arm, morphing the hand into a blade. "I'm ready." "Glad to hear it," Yami laughed before rounding on Wonderwace. "Hey, new guy, get moving. How long are you gonna stand there?" Ben turned to see that Wonderwace appeared to be staring off into space, his mouth hanging open. Yami scoffed. "Another freak joined us, huh?" Ben frowned. "You wouldn't happen to be?" Yami pulled out his sword to block the white-haired boy, now clad in a mostly black robe with white at the shoulders, and swng a katana with a flower-like hilt. "Toshiro Hitsugeya," the boy said, "Captain of Squad 10. Ben thought back to that stack of papers Aizen gave him regarding this particular captain. Hitsugeya was the one with ice powers. "Hey, what a coincidence," Yami beamed. "I'm a 10, too, Espada D's, Yami Largo." Hitsugeya's eyes widened. "D's? You're an Espada." "Oh, so you know about that, huh?" Yami's eyes narrowed, but the grin never left his face. "Sounds like you fought someone who should have kept their mouth shut." Ben then noticed that the garganta was beginning to close. Quickly he leaped and slammed onto the ground. Striking it, a pillar of crystal elevated back up to where everyone else was facing each other off. The man with the feathers and the bald man were facing Luppy, now dressed in black robes. The feathered man was holding what appeared to be a 4-bladed sickle, while the bald man was holding a spear. The blonde woman, now wearing the same types of robes, was staring at Wonderwace with uncertainty. Setarankar was crouched in midair, watching a passing bird. Detecting movement, her eyes landed on Ben, and she took an offensive stance once more before looking him over. "You," the woman said cautiously, "you're definitely not a hollow." "What gave it away?" Ben asked with a grin. "No mask? No hollow hole?" The woman scowled before her eyes widened as something seemed to click. "Are you, Ben?" He gawked. "What makes you say that?" When the woman disappeared, Ben brought his arm up to block as she suddenly appeared in front of him, bringing her blade down on his arm. She began swng rapidly, but even with his crystalline body, Ben barely felt any force behind her slashes. "Listen," the woman said, her voice somewhat muffled by the sound of her blade striking Diamond Head's body. "We know who you are and your situation with Aizen. There's something you need to know." Ben narrowed his eyes. "What is it?" "Hey, Ben," Luppy cried, cutting the woman off. "I'm bored with my opponent. If you're just gonna let that pretty Soul Reaper wear herself out, then send her my way. I want a challenge, so I might as well fight them all at once." Ben clenched his teeth in frustration. The woman eyed Ben cautiously. Is he a friend of yours? No, he whispered bluntly. All the same, I can't just stand by and let him get killed. Don't suppose I could convince you to just make them retreat to Hugo Mundo. Somebody else suddenly appeared beside the woman. Ben's eyes widened as he took in the newcomer's features. He looked like a slim teenager with blonde hair, jeans, a black t-shirt, and a domino mask that covered his eyes. At long last Ben met the mystery guy Aizen had been talking about. And he had absolutely no clue as to who this guy was. Lieutenant Matsumoto, the boy said, grinning at the transformed Petrosapian. Leave this guy to me. The aforementioned Matsumoto looked at him from the corner of her eye. Are you sure? The masked boy nodded. I've been waiting for this. Matsumoto nodded. I'll leave you to it then. She disappeared, most likely heading to Luppy, but all that mattered to Ben was the stranger before him. Guess you're not a soul reaper, Ben said, though he still shifted into a fighting stance. Unless you prefer hand-to-hand and dressing casually. The blonde-haired boy just smirked as he assumed a fighting stance. Why don't you beat me and find out? Oh boy, Ben muttered before lunging at his opponent. With surprising speed and agility for one possibly not a soul reaper, the blonde boy dodged his attack and struck Ben across the face, sending him crashing to the ground. Dazed and surprised by the blow, Ben looked up, only to quickly roll out of the way when his opponent shot towards him. When his opponent's fist struck the ground, he made a noticeable crater. Ben raised his hands and began firing shards, but the boy dodged the shards and darted towards him again. Ben wrapped his arms around the mysterious youth, trapping him in a bear hug. However, he found himself struggling to hold the boy still. Just then the boy grinned before shooting into the air, carrying Ben with him. Caught off guard by the sudden shift, Ben loosened his grip enough for his opponent to break free. Before Ben could retaliate, the boy grabbed him by one of his back spikes, and the next thing the hero knew, he was flying towards some woods in the distance. He had just enough time to cover his face as he crashed into the ground once more, sliding across the grass. Ben groaned as he pushed himself up, wiping dirt off his chest and shoulders. This guy's serious. Looks like I'll have to be too. No need for that, Ben. He spun around to see the blonde boy already behind him, only now he had a more relaxed posture. I had a feeling you were holding back, but I had to make sure the fight was convincing to those Arankar. Sure, Ben said slowly. You have every right to doubt me, so I'm gonna go ahead and get this out of the way. The mysterious boy clapped his hands together. My name is Ken Tennyson. Ben froze. I'm your son from an alternate timeline, Ken went on. I accidentally wound up here during a battle with one of my enemies. Professor Paradox found me, told me about what was going on, and asked me to help you. Ben's hands fell to his side, his mouth agape, and looking for all the world like some bizarre art statue. Obviously, that's a lot to take in, let alone believe. Ken peeled off his mask, showing his entire face to the hero. The wielder of the Ultimatrix was stunned to see that there was a resemblance between them. Not a mirror image like how Albedo originally looked, but Ken definitely had the look of a Tennyson. Just to be on the safe side, Ken added, use the Ultimatrix to scan my DNA. Ben frowned, eyeing the other team. After a moment's pause, he sighed. Ultimatrix, commence DNA scan. Code 01010. The Ultimatrix symbol began glowing, and a computerized version of Ben's own voice spoke. Commencing scan. A green light shined from the Ultimatrix onto Ken, shifting up and down his body. It continued to do this for a few seconds when the light ceased. Scan complete. Human DNA of Ben Tennyson detected. Unknown DNA also detected. Ben's jaw dropped as Ken chuckled. And if that doesn't convince you, then how about this? Aside from clowns, you also have a fear of peacocks, and you used to sleep with a teddy bear. What was his name again? Furry Freddy. Why, you are my son, Ben stammered. Yeah, Dad shared that information with me in case I ever ran into his younger self due to his own time travel adventures. Although I don't think this is what he had in mind. And the unknown DNA. That would be Mom's. Long story short, Dad wound up in another universe just like you did. Only the universe he ended up in has superheroes. Most of them are part of an organization called the Justice League. Both Mom and Dad are members, naturally. Who is your mom anyway? Ben couldn't help but ask. Her name is Kara, but her hero name is Supergirl. She's a Kryptonian. They look human but have powers like super strength and super speed among others. Ken grinned. Where did you think I got mine from? Supergirl? Justice League? Ben rubbed his cranium, leaning against a tree. Son, wife. Meeting his future self, BEN10,000, was one thing, but knowing he actually had a wife and child was another. Then there was this Justice League to think about. This is not what I expected to find when I came here. Ken nodded sympathetically. Then he suddenly punched a tree, the blow actually uprooting the tree and sending it crashing into others behind it, toppling them like dominoes. He then started punching the ground. To make sure everyone thinks we're still fighting, Ken explained to a confused Ben. I know this is a lot to take in, Ben. I wish I could tell you, but that's not important right now. What is important is this, your suspicions of Aizen. They're all true. Ben stood straight up, eyes narrowed. Really? Ken nodded as he kicked another tree down. Aizen's true plan is to reach the ruler of Soul Society, the Soul King, and kill him so that he can rule over everyone. Ben's fists shook and his teeth were grinding so strong that he could have made sparks. So that whole story about wanting to make Hugo Mundo a better place for hollows. I'm afraid I don't know what Aizen told you, but it was definitely a lie, Ken said softly, even as he punched some nearby rocks, smashing them to dust. Did he happen to mention a group called the Wizards? When Ben nodded, his progeny continued. Aizen was the one responsible for that. He forced them to undergo holification and become fugitives from Soul Society. Ben hung his head, feeling his body go numb from all the information that had just been dropped on him. Hey, it's all right, Ken said, pausing in his mock fight. I was told that Aizen was a very charismatic guy, and he took advantage of the fact that you like helping others. Plus, that guy's got over a century of experience. It's not your fault. Doesn't feel that way to me, Ben said weakly, eyes on his feet. The air seemed to shift, and the two heroes turned to see flares of light in the sky. Sounds like the others have started powering up, Ken said before turning back to his sort of father. There's something else I have to warn you about. Have you ever seen Aizen use his Zanpakuto? Ben frowned, cupping his chin. If you mean his Shikai, then no, I haven't. Why? Ken sighed in relief. Aizen's Zanpakuto is called Kyoka Suijutsu. Once you've seen it activate, Aizen has control over all your senses, being able to completely hypnotize you. What? Ken quickly struck another tree to muffle Ben's shout. Not that it mattered because there suddenly flashes of red light and explosions nearby. It seemed the battles between the Arankar and Soul Reapers were getting more intense. So if you ever go up against Aizen, make sure you don't see him activate his Zanpakuto, Ken urged. Don't plan to, Ben said, clenching his fists once more. Aizen's toyed with me enough. There's no way I'm letting him do anything else. Ken nodded at his sort of father's words as the hero looked back up at him. Thanks for telling me this, Ken. I'm glad I finally know the truth now. Same here. Come on, we better start fighting near the others again. Ken put his mask back on. Throw me in the direction of the fight and we'll trade some blows. Ben flinched. Are you sure? I get we're gonna fake it and all, but still, I feel really bad trying to hit my sort of son. Ken grinned. Don't worry, I'm pretty durable. Something else you got from your mom? Ken nodded. Ben sighed. Well, okay then. Here I go, lunging forward. He grabbed Ken by the shirt and threw him into the direction of the battle. He slammed a hand down on the ground, summoning a crystal pillar to launch him after his pseudo-son. When he landed, he saw that Luppy had entered his released state and had currently captured Lieutenant Matsumoto, the bald Soul Reaper, and the one with the feathers inside his tentacles. Captain Hitsugeo was nowhere to be seen while Yami seemed to be hammering away at the ground. About time you got back, Luppy said snidely as he eyed Ken. Don't tell me this guy was giving you trouble. Ben ignored him as Ken charged, the two striking each other in the chest. He threw a punch, but Ken ducked and jabbed. Ben blocked it and followed up with a karate chop. Ken rolled to the ground and legs swept the Petrosapian, who fell to the ground. When Ken was about to deliver an elbow drop, Ben struck the ground, forming a crystal to knock his alternate son to the side. He tackled Ken and the two grappled on the ground. I think they buy it, Ken whispered. So far, Ben whispered back. But there's got to be a way to make the Arrancar return to Hucomundo without them getting suspicious. Ken was about to speak when both he and Ben felt the air shift once more. Looking up, they saw Captain Hitsugaya standing in the air before Luppy with one of the latter's tentacles encased in ice. Ice had also congregated around Hitsugaya's body, giving him a draconic appearance. Not only had it formed wings and a long tail for the captain, but it had also gathered around his feet and left hand, resembling claws. Luppy scowled. So you were still alive, huh? Hirenmaru is the most powerful of all ice and snow Zanpakuto, Hitsugaya said to the Espada. As long as there is water, it can be revived countless times. Don't bother, he went on when Luppy took a defensive stance. It's impossible for you to win now. I had ample time to prepare. You wasted too much time to realize it. If your weapon is 8 arms, then my weapon is... Just then Ben realized that the youthful-looking captain and Luppy were surrounded by numerous ice pillars. All the water in the atmosphere, Hitsugaya finished. Whoa, Ben muttered. I wonder if Big Chill could do something like that. Hitsugaya pointed his sword at Luppy. Senin Hyoro. All the pillars slammed into Luppy, forming one big chunk of ice. His tentacles had slacked at the last minute, freeing the captive Soul Reapers. Sorry, Hitsugaya said dismissively, but it looks like 8 just wasn't enough. Ben cringed. Is he? Ken looked up at the block of ice, his eyes seeming to glow. No, he's still alive in there and... A pressure built up in the air, taking everyone by surprise. A cracking sound drew their attention to the ice. Sure enough, cracks were forming across the surface. What? How? Matsumoto asked as the ice shattered. Luppy picked himself up, having ended up back in his sealed state. He had some bruises but looked more annoyed and angry than injured. You think you're pretty clever, huh, Soul Reaper? Luppy yelled at Hitsugaya. What happened? Hitsugaya said quietly. His spiritual pressure just went up. How? Ben wanted to smack his forehead. The fruits. Ken blinked. Fruits? What fruits? Ben looked at him apologetically. Aizen convinced me to help make these special fruits that boost the eater's spiritual power. Ken's eyes widened at this revelation. That complicates things. I know, Ben said quietly. Luppy chuckled, a maddened glint in his eye as Hitsugaya, Matsumoto, and the other 2 Soul Reapers raised their weapons. Too bad for you, Captain, that Lord Aizen had us take extra precautions before we left. Extra precautions? Hitsugaya narrowed his eyes in confusion. You had your chance, Soul Reaper, Luppy went on. Now I'm going to make sure you die. A tearing sound filled the air, Ben looking up to see a garganta opening and beams of golden light shooting out of it, one of them hitting Luppy and encasing him in what appeared to be a transparent pillar. Ben was so confused by the sight he didn't realize one of the lights was coming toward him until he found that he too was encased. Hey, what the? Luppy scowled at the pillar before he sneered at Hitsugaya. Looks like we won't be able to continue our fight, Captain. But I suggest that you don't forget my face, because the next time we fight, I'll kill you for sure. It's a negation, Lieutenant Matsumoto said as she appeared beside Ken. Hollows can use it to rescue each other through a garganta. Once someone is inside one, they can't be harmed by any means, nor can the negation be broken. Ken looked up at Ben, who was unable to do anything but look back as he was pulled closer and closer to the garganta. Ken mouthed something to him and Ben could just barely make out the words. Good luck, Ben. Ben was thankful. He had a feeling that he was going to need it a lot. His eyes never left Ken until the garganta had completely closed. Mission accomplished, huh? Yami said, having been pulled in 2. Wonderwaste was also there, looking around vacantly as he had been. That hat and clogs guy was tough, but I bet I caught him off guard when I ate that fruit. He clapped Ben on the back, making sure to avoid his back spikes. Gotta give you and Shale credit, Ben. Those fruits are great. Imagine what would happen if I had eaten 2 of them. Or 5. Ben said nothing, the full weight of what had happened having finally dawned on him. Aizen was the bad guy all along and Ben had been aiding in his plans. And now here he was, going right back into the heart of the lion's den. How was he going to get out of this one? So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 11. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Bigby the Big Bad Wolf on fanfictionnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.